you look at environment change, you look at climate change, you can use, and we saw that during this pandemic, that genomics was the one technology that helped us to understand how to create vaccines, helped us to understand through water waste and through, for instance, there were lots of ways to be able to look at information that was coming in wastewater to understand, how the
Hello everyone, welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk series brought to you by AKFI, Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit industry consortium committed to bridging the gap between ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. My name is Isabella. I am the co-host of this talk series, together with Manuel, another co-host. And our special guest today, Anun. Anun, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you, Isabella, and thank you, Professor Manuel. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast.
It's such an honor to have you. Yeah, and thanks to this talk series, we get to connect with great minds to together discuss the current state and the future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. And a little bit about Anun to our audience. She is the CEO of a company called Map My Genome with a vision to touch 100 million lives. The company was established in 2013 and is focusing on improved healthcare through genomics. And she's a serial entrepreneur and also a columnist, poet, and a charismatic speaker. As the founder and CEO of the company Map My Genome, she introduced the concept of personal genomics in India with a launch in 2013. She co-founded and pioneered her first venture from 2000 to 2013 through innovative things like LIMS Solutions, Global Acquisition Awards, and fundraise activities. Thank you, Anun, for taking the time today, and we want to hear everything you're doing around this arena and share with us your perspective on the future of ESG and future building. To start our question or our conversation today, please tell us what are your thoughts on the current state of sustainability, ESG, and digital transformation, particularly in the things that you're doing, genetic testing in healthcare, things like that.
Sure. Thanks, Isabella. So I think I wanted to maybe, break it down a little bit in terms of my thoughts around ESG. And I think, when you look at it as just a number, I think it becomes harder to sort of, ascertain its value. But really, if you break it down, right? I mean, if you look at genomics as an industry that as potentially being able to replace and transform a lot of what healthcare has really been doing. I think we are starting to see that, instead of something that was a one size fits all, we're now trying to build something that will work for individual people, right? So you're trying to figure out ways of reducing the amount of, medication overuse, for instance, which also required a lot of different things that you do to the environment. When you do a genomic analysis, for instance, you are able to then personalize many things and thereby reducing a lot of the carbon footprint, if you will, not just in terms of just buildings and other things, but really in terms of understanding how our body works and how each individual body works. So I think there is an automatic assumption in terms of how you're going to actually reduce that overall, what is going to happen to the environment really. The second thing I think is that when you look at environment and you look at what is happening, I think through medical science, we've been able to extend our age, right? So, what was our earlier living age is now, we are hoping to live to 120, 130 or so, right? But if you live like that with a lot of disease and a lot of problems, then you are going to be a big burden on the environment as well. But if you are able to take preventive measures and be able to live that with ways to be normally active, healthy, and being able to contribute to the society, you can then add to the overall value, and thereby reduce the overall, footprint in all the wastage and other things get reduced automatically. So I think one is we start with that presumption that, when you look at genomics, you're able to actually make an impact on individuals, as well as individuals. If you take as a collective, then you're making that change overall, right, in terms of just the environment. The second thing is that, genomics can also be very helpful in terms of understanding, why certain things work the way it does, right? So when you look at environment change, you look at climate change, you can use, and we saw that during this pandemic, that genomics was the one technology that helped us to understand how to, create vaccines, helped us to understand through water waste and through, for instance, there were lots of ways to be able to look at information that was coming in wastewater to understand, how COVID was spreading and so on. So there are many ways scientifically that genomics also helps in terms of understanding of the environment and being able to protect both the human species, but also other species. Similarly, I think other than humans, there are animals and many other things that are there. The third would be to understand environment from, your microbiome and many other things. Now, I've thrown open a lot of different pieces for you over here, but I'm not going by your typical definition of, an ESG, because I think that genomics does a lot more in terms of how we connect ourselves to the overall sustainability of the entire planet and all the species that come with it. So the third one that I was talking about was more the microbiome and also environmental factors that actually affect the health of the whole planet, right? And what I mean by that is that today you can actually do a small stool test or a saliva test and understand the complete microbiome of, what kind of bacteria do you have, what kind of, and bacteria are more than the humans in our own gut, right? So understanding that, the little microbiome, the environment within our own bodies is an important piece that genomics brings to us. And then you can also look at the environment. What has pollution done to us? What are other things that we have been doing in terms of climate change? Can we actually analyze that? And all of that can be helpful from a genomics lens perspective. So I think that, when you look at the E part of it, I can go into many more pieces as well, but I think that would be more like a base level understanding of the environment, but also in many ways connected to sustainability of the planet, sustainability of the species that are there around it, but also in terms of how can you now build a better way of creating sustainabilities of companies, right? And I think I maybe add a couple more layers in that. So when you think about sustainability, I think one is how do you create something? How do you build something that will last for a long time? Whether it is companies that will last, whether it is your information or the data that you create that will last, and that ties in also to your digital transformation. Is that today, I think, when you look at genomics or you look at something that we do where you take a little swab or you take a little bit of blood, and you're able to generate a lot of data. And that data then becomes the basis of personalizing a lot of experience, whether it is in terms of what kind of blood tests you need to do, what kind of food that you can eat, what kind of different things that you do. So you're being able to create these little pieces or little islands, I would say, of information that can then tie in back to that individual's genetic data, right? So 2-3 things are very important. One is how do you protect the privacy of individuals? And the second is how do you make sure that you are able to use this information? You're not constantly redoing it and thereby using a lot more resources to be able to do that. So that would be another piece, right? So can you create a way of creating genetic information that can be reused over a long period of time, right, for that individual? So if I am, for instance, or let's say Isabella does a test and does genome analysis, you get data. And that data can then be used for for your own medical record, right? So that becomes something that you can decide when you want to share it with somebody. And so creating the right kind of privacy layers on it, creating the right kind of ways of being able to access it and share it are important pieces of layers of what I would say, how do you create those right kind of sustainable layers around that medical record or this. The third part is also like, if you want to think about, are we really as an industry creating ways of, the only thing that, for instance, you're looking at is you have kits and you're ensuring that this can be sent over to an individual and you're able to swab it and send it back. So I think, creating something like that is easy to use becomes easier from a consumer point of view. And you don't have to create large infrastructure. For instance, you don't have to create tens and thousands of buildings to be able to provide a service like that. Right? You have a central lab, you ship out a kit, you get it back, and you're able to then do everything else through the internet, through the genetic counseling or reporting or sending anything back is all electronic. So you're reducing a lot of the paper wastage, if I can say that. And the third part is about governance, and I think that's probably the most important. And while I don't know if there is one yardstick to measure all of ESG in one way, but I think governance, for instance, starts from your intent to be, a good company, right? And the intent comes because if you look at the right kind of people who want to solve a problem, I think there are many that might lay claims to it, and a lot of companies do. But I think it starts from how is your board comprised, right? Is your board the right, have we created the right kind of board with the right diversity? Does the top level management actually reflect that? Not because it was a checklist, but because that's how you've created the systems to sort of build itself over a period of time. And the third is that, how transparent or, disclosures that you can bring. And I think that's common to everybody. But to answer your question, I think I gave you a long-wounded response, but hope that, gets the conversation started.
Absolutely. We love these kind of multi-layers perspective because what we're talking about, Manuel and I and the guests have been saying the same thing. It's a very complex topic. It can be just discussed based on one field or one subject matters. And what you give us is very comprehensive overview of almost a fundamental level in a multi-layer level view of points. So really appreciate the in-depth and insights.
And thank you for bringing these players together. It would be hard for me to unpack them, but one thing that you change right now in the way I'm looking at the world, we almost forgot about the individual when we think about the nature, the sustainability, the big problems with carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. So we have this macro view of the environment, and now you brought back to life the micro view, the biome, the genetics, and how an individual in his or her uniqueness are also part of this environment, and how we interact with the environment at a very, I would say, basic level. Like the genetics is the link that between us and any form of life really on the planet. And we, thank you for bringing this together. And the other thing, when we talk about sustainability, first thing, the amount of data we generate, which is huge, and we're saying about 60-70% of the data we store and we never use. So thank you for bringing this issue of having the data reusable and efficiently collected. And that goes in what you said about the number of buildings and so on, right? Thinking of hospitals and health centers, which proliferate as the population grows and ages. So you brought this picture also together, and last and not least, the picture of governance and how you can do it with intent and transparency. I'll focus on transparency for 1 second, because if everything was transparent, we shouldn't have regulations and rules and greenwashing. So I'm not sure if transparency it's as common as the genetic code of life on this planet. I don't think so, and data doesn't support it. And so thank you for bringing that together. And continuing maybe a little bit on the governance, any more things you can bring forward to our audience? How to do the governance right? A lot of CEOs fight today with understanding the technology, and I said fight, right? They struggle. They try to understand the changes that only 3 years ago, 4 years ago we brought with the what we call it the stakeholders capitalism, and the focus on people, which is the core of your company. So, question, how to do the governance right in this new world?
It's a great question, and I think the challenge for a lot of people to understand what will be a good governance, I think becomes. So I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for 22 years, and I remember that I've had went through where we started a small startup, moved to where we had private equity and other people that came in. As well as again starting off and being able to get to that journey again. So I think there are two things, right? One is that are you reporting for the sake of reporting, right? And I think in order to do that, I think when the company becomes large, has an army of specialists, I would say, they are able to do that in a manner that is probably according to a specific guideline that is there. But at the same time, I think if people were able to understand that, for instance, when you are creating a board in the beginning, and if your intent is that you want these people to really help you, and I think it starts from that basic assumption that, do you create a board because you were supposed to create a board, like you're forced to create a board, or are you creating a board because you really believe that they bring in the value that you as an individual will not be able to actually, create that. So for instance, I think when we started Map My Genome, I could have started it as like a 1-person, 2-person board, right? Which would be the founders or friends of founders. But instead, I think we reached out to people that we strongly believe that, have the right experience, would be able to help us on actually guiding the company and be fair in terms of, if there's something that we do not correct, I think they should be able to point that out. And I think that's an important thing to make sure that it starts with humility at the top, to make sure that you understand that there are people who are better than you. And I think whether it is on a board level or whether it is in your team level, right? And I think those are the two pieces that I think it starts with. And ultimately, it's about creating a culture of saying that, how do you create a company that has a culture that is sort of much more open, so that, not only can you create the right kind of governance at the top, but you create the DNA of your own company in a way that is open. And I think when you do that, and I think the easiest way to understand is by talking to people who are actually, their perception in terms of not just as what shows in the press, but people who actually come and work in the company. I think that barometer is probably more important than maybe only things that you might see on news websites or your board level statistics and other things. So I think it's important to understand it's not as easy. We have not yet gotten to the point where we can, like we can sequence your human genome. I think sequencing the company's genome is a little bit harder, right? Because there are many more pieces that are there. But I think ultimately it is about understanding, and maybe at some future point, we'll be able to take the elements that actually make a difference. Because ultimately what you want to do, whether it is for investors who want to invest in companies that are, ESG compliant or other things, I think maybe we need to be able to create the right kind of, and it can't be a one size fits all really, right? Because if you say that, ESG level 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm not 100% sure. I saw that there are some that is poor, average, whatever. There are some ratings. But I think that has to be slightly different for different sectors, different stage of the company, and a different level of how much reporting needs to be done, because you don't want to bog down a company with a lot of reporting on things that are not critical at the early stages, but over a period of time, making sure that that DNA of the company remains intact, right? So if you have a mission, is that mission being something that you can actually see over a period of time or not? So I think it is not an easy task for all of you who are, working in this field to try to make it simpler. But I think over a period of time, we'll get there. So just like, every human genome is unique, I think every company is unique. We haven't yet figured out how to understand all the pieces of that puzzle. But I think there are ways to be able to do that. I think I was just seeing the new open AI based platform, and it's quite fascinating how you can get information using AI that maybe humans maybe had a bigger bias than not. So I think there are ways, but we have not yet, I think, completely understood all the pieces that we need to measure and whether it is even measurable. So I think, but we are heading to the right path, because I think we have been able to capture a lot of interesting elements. I think the harder part is, how do you make sure that people who are doing it for the sake of getting a benefit out of something like this are identifiable, right? Versus somebody who's making a genuine attempt to be compliant. Because I think if you're doing it for making sure that, this is a sticker that I have on my, company, like I have certifications like, an ISO or others, I think, then it has to have a very clear set of definitions. Right? And I think we are not yet there, because every company is different, every company is unique. So therefore, I think we need to be able to, over a period of time, I think we'll get to that point where it'll be easier to sort of hopefully get people to actually believe that that is true, right? And I know that that's not an easy task to get everybody to sort of think that that's good. But I think if you tie it to some sort of an incentive, and I don't mean financial incentive or otherwise, but, when I think about, when someone, for instance, tells an average person, climate change is great, I think most people are not bothered about it, right? I mean, I'm just saying, like, an average person is not. But if you tell them that, if I'm going to look at your genome, for instance, and I can tell you that if I look at the environment today versus some other time, the reason why you are likely to be more at risk for cancer or something else has increased because of what we have done, I think that you can probably force people to sort of make some changes more in terms of their, lifestyle and environment. Similarly, I think when you look at governance, if it is possible, maybe if there are ways to incentivize people to start thinking that you're not doing it because it's a sticker to be had, but it's because that compliance actually brings in better people, better quality of people. If you're open, if you're compliant, and you have the right disclosures, you're doing the right things. The second thing is regulatory bodies will not be able to come back and bite the company because you're doing the right things. And the third thing is, because ultimately I think wrong things at some point get caught, right? And I think that's something that needs to be highlighted to companies, that, there is a way to get to some place fast, but if you're not doing it the right way, I think there are people, you will be caught at some point, right? So I think those things need to be highlighted so that people understand that this is not about getting somewhere quickly, like getting to a place of saying, I've reached, I've become a unicorn, I've become a whatever X and Y, but it is about building something that is going to stay and sustain over a period of time, because no company has been built in a day. And so just pumping in money, making sure that you have the right stickers, are not something that actually gets you to the next level. So I think those are things that maybe we need to highlight in terms of governance. I can go on, but I'll stop here.
No, we'll invite you back. No worries. We'll continue the story. But what you brought in my mind is something very interesting. Actually, ESG, it's in some way trying to measure the genetics of the company. And to start with what you said, it's actually this level of humility and the level of diversity that it brings to the board of directors. So not diversity for the sake of diversity. Many northern countries, for instance, I'm sure you know, now prescribe or ask for a certain ratio of women, men in the board of directors. But this ratio can be arbitrary and means nothing really if they don't bring the same culture, the same DNA, if you want, not identical, different actually, as our DNAs are different. And that's a very, very unique perspective. And the other one, as you said, ESG cannot be just a sticker or a label on the door. It almost, connecting back to your topic and the way the Map My Genome wants to bring an understanding of the lifestyle and how the lifestyle influences the genetics, and the genetics to some level determine our longevity, is the same mechanism for the company. ESG should be a lifestyle. It's not the same for everybody. As you said very clearly, every company has to have its own ESG, which is built from the start. The way you build a startup, the way you build the board of directors, the way the CEOs act, right, in both in public and in the company. So I can see a parallel between what you're doing with Map My Genome and actually the ESG, the genetics of the ESG, if we can coin this term here, or maybe it was already coined before.
No, I didn't find much, but I was looking at this thing, and I think there are a few companies that have made a lot of attempt to create some goals for them and in genomics, but I didn't see that much more. But maybe there is. We don't know.
So I would like to sort of go from the microbiome and the individual genes to sort of the opposite side and talk about the business responsibility and sustainability reporting, which is the guiding rules and regulations in India for making mandatory actually for the top companies the ESG reporting and results. So continuing with the same parallel, making the genetics of the company public, and let the public judge the companies, and let the investors, as you said, judge the companies by risk and how they really behave. So could you tell us a little bit more about the BRSR, the business responsibility and sustainability reporting regulations in India?
So I think currently a lot of some of those regulations, I think, like especially for the corporate social responsibility and others, are currently for certain size of the companies and public level companies. So they are able to then build in certain programs, whether it is on education, health, and so on. Now, while many people are doing a lot of good things on that front, and for instance, one of the things that we did during COVID was that we looked at we worked with a US company, but along with them, we donated 1 million kits to the governments of different states. And I think that was a way to be able to say that, can we contribute to something that ultimately, is infecting all of us, right? It's not, COVID was not something that was, that was, affecting me or you or others. It was affecting everybody. And I think so it was not just as something that you're doing as a responsibility because it is indicated. In our case, it wasn't necessary, but we felt that if we can, why shouldn't we, right? If it is within our capability to do it, I think we should do it. So one is that we are seeing that a lot of good initiatives have been taken by quite a few companies. But I think in many cases, sometimes I think you also find that some of the reporting that is done can also be done for the sake of reporting, and it might not necessarily be, the right, how can I put it, might not necessarily be the most transparent or open, right? And so I think what needs to be done is that in the end, I think what people have to realize is that when you do something like this, when you do reporting of any of whether it's financial numbers, whether anything else, I think it's important to make sure that people understand that there is consequence that are there, that are associated with that. And it shouldn't just be looked upon as, some of the activities that you do should not just be looked upon as something that are, just need to be done, right? A check mark, for instance. And I think that's where the challenge lies, right? That how do you get over from the check mark culture, towards somewhere where you realize that by doing this, it's actually helpful for you, right? And I think, we haven't yet crossed that path, because I think the feeling among a lot of people, a lot of companies and a lot of this thing is that this is just something that is mandatory and therefore needs to be done, right? And I feel that the moment that feeling sets in that this is something that's mandatory, now whether that is including diversity on boards, whether that is including your management and all of that, a lot of that has to do with the fact that for most people, when something is forced upon you, you will do it. But whether you do it with the right intent is the challenge, right? So how do you get people to do that? Because, for instance, I think you mentioned the number of women on the board. I think that is also there in India. In public companies, you have to have certain number of independent directors, certain number of women directors, and so on. If the intent is not there, I think what you will get is people who are relatives, family members, and so on and so forth, right? And so they're not actively involved in the company, but they are there. So your name will be there, but you're not really active in that. So I think if they really felt, for instance, if in our case you have 50% men, 50% women, and people from completely different, diverse backgrounds. But if I felt that, this is a must, I just need to have it, maybe, people are just going to add somebody on their list. So I think that's an important part, right? A checkbox. It's the same thing when, I often tell that when people invite me to give talks, for instance, and they'll say, you are a woman entrepreneur. And half the time I reject those and say that don't do it because it's a check mark that you want to call a woman, and therefore that is the case, right? And I think that's the problem that we need to fix. And I think that's more a social bias than something. The intent might be good to say that, you want to have a certain number of, diversity amongst the board so that you become much more open to ideas on not just on ideas on implementation, but also ideas in terms of transparency, in terms of how do you report financial numbers and other numbers. But if it becomes a checkbox, then it becomes hard to implement those with sincerity. And I think that's where, if we can do the social engineering first, I think that will automatically result in better board reporting. And I think that's not an easy thing to do. And I don't know if one country is better than the other, but I think, in each country, we have to find a way to sort of inspire or motivate people to do rather than force people to do that. Similarly to how you would get people to do something in the company, right? I think the same way, I think founders and business people and investors should realize that by getting companies to do this more sincerely, I think it automatically will bring better results. But if it is something that they are forced to do, they will do something, but it might not be with the right results.
Very good point. We wish to continue on this thread, but I want to switch to also your experience as an entrepreneur, as a serial entrepreneur, I should say. But I'll turn to Isabella, which is also following in the same footpath. She just launched a book, and she's carrying this line of questions, about digitalization, digital mind. She titled the book "The Digital Mind of Tomorrow," for instance, which is a very near tomorrow. Is not tomorrow in a century. But I'll turn to Isabella for more a line of discussion about entrepreneurship and how to achieve it. So Isabella,
thank you.
Your turn.
Thank you. Yeah, Manuel knows me. Probably it's one of the best person to describe what I'm doing. He's my mentor. He knows exactly what stage am I. So he can always point me to the right questions, to the right people. Same in this case about entrepreneurship. I found a lot of time. I want to make a note about what you have been talking about as well, even though I'm not commenting. Manuel knows my mind is actually racing. Everything you're talking about, I can relate it to the things I talk in my book or the things I'm thinking about genuinity, about transparency, about this mindset shift more than just, a system change. And all these are really, really long-term hard work that we need to think hard. But even by talking about this, I feel encouraged. And you're talking about how we should stop this check mark, right, mentality. And that's what we do in school. I was like that when I was trying to finish the exam. I check marked this exam. I did a good score. So that's really something we need to dig deep in the fundamental level to the younger generation, how we've been raised until the point that we're working. So totally agree. It's a full transformation. It's a long run. It's not a short sight program that we can done overnight. So thank you for sharing all of these important points to let us be aware, to let us start working on it, to think about it.
Thank you, and congratulations on your book. It sounds very interesting. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you, and I'm happy to share a copy with you. And back to the entrepreneurship, I'm very enticed and intrigued by this kind of social entrepreneurship. As you mentioned, it's a social movement, and a lot of time I think the quality of entrepreneurs are very embraced in building this future. As you mentioned, genuinity, risk taking, to be able to see things on the fundamental level. And what are you, as a serial entrepreneur, what are your challenges or piece of advice you want to share? Because a lot of time we have a great idea, we have even a good set of team, a labor force to execute, but we were lacking. We're back to the critical point. It's the financial support. It's the capital support to raise fund to execute on the proper level. So what are your piece of advice to to all of our entrepreneurs today as a recognized serial entrepreneur today?
So I would say that, it's not obviously the same journey for everybody. But I think 2-3 things matter. I think one is that how comfortable and how passionate are you about the idea, right? So let's assume that whatever you're doing, you truly believe in that. I think there are ways to sort of, build on that idea without, and capital raising is hard. And especially now, I think in this environment is going to be harder still. So I think there are ways that you have to find. One is whether you truly believe that that's something you want to go after, because it has to be something that, you are okay with the ups and downs because you are enjoying you enjoy the whole process, right? And I think that's the important part, that, for me, I think as an individual, I don't get stressed easily, right? So even though I've gone through a lot of ups and downs, I think it is easier for me to be able to go through that. I don't have, like, a lot of entrepreneurs came to me and they said, we're going to be giving you a call soon because we don't understand how you remain so relaxed. And I often tell them that, in the end, when you look at something, tell me if you get worried or anxious about it, is it going to make it, is that going to solve your problem? And
I'm
if
going
it
to
doesn't,
steal a question from from Isabella, but I know she will ask sooner or later, do you meditate? Do you use yoga? How you keep cool? Because it's a
genetics, no.
complex world.
Genetics. I was gonna say that. That's a
So
done deal. I can tell. Yeah, Anun, it's like genetically or just born like that, right? That's what she probably meant to begin with. That's such a gifted talent. You have to be an entrepreneur.
No, I think part of it is genetics, but also I think the second part is that, I've, every time, every phase of my life, when you achieve something, then you go through a tough time. I think you have to reflect upon it. So, that is a little bit of meditation over there. And I do believe in meditation. I think it has very beneficial, lot of beneficially, effects on your body and your mind. And I also do yoga. So I think I do the right things. I eat very healthy. I'm a little lazy, so I don't exercise as much as I should. But I exercise enough. I do make sure that, I walk enough. I go through some phases. So you have to understand, I guess, for everybody is to understand how they function, right? And to be able to optimize in those boundaries how you function. So for instance, I think, I might, while I have like some long-term goals, I think some things, small things that I know that, for instance, I enjoy cycling for some time, swimming for some time, doing something else for some time. And I think that's just how I am. I'm not going to be someone who's going to be able to run every day, for instance. And I think that is fine, right? You have to understand how your health functions.
Right.
So one is that. So I do that, make sure that I do some amount of things that make me, that is there. And then the second thing is to understand what triggers, what kind of things will make you work. So I think that's one of the things I have over a period of time figured out, what works for me, what doesn't work for me. And I think, a genetic analysis helps in understanding that as well. The second part is to be able to make sure that, once you understand, how do you navigate through that process, right? If understanding makes you more anxious, then maybe that is not the smartest thing to do. So I think it is mostly when I've even with some of my team members, I often mentor them because, they come, they have a problem, then they're coming to me, all charged up and, very saying, I tell them to sit down, relax for a little bit. And then we discuss, right? And then we discuss what are the paths forward. And why would you choose a particular path? Is that going to help? And is getting angry or getting anxious going to help them? So I think, many times by just laying those options out, I think allows people to understand that, what is going to be the best outcome. And also, I think part of it is, I'm old enough now to have gone through experiences that that you realize that is only going to be detrimental for you. So I think, I don't know if I answered the question, but I've gone a long way all around.
You did. You absolutely did. You absolutely did. Uh, to me, it sounds more like to find yourself, to find your passion, what you're done to do for even the rest of your life. That kind of passion. And another thing is to manage yourself. And even you can learn by doing it. And I actually came from that point, so I absolutely agree with you. I was not really good at handling stress. And a friend light me up. She was like, how can you do your own business if you're so easy to get stressed out? Sorry, did you wanted to add something?
No, I was just, I also forgot. But yeah, I think.
I know.
Yeah, I think some people, so it's not like one kind of people do well in business versus the other, but I think it is because I've met a lot of people who are very different kinds of leaders, right? And so I think each one finds their own unique way of managing. Some manage by being tough, and I think a certain kind of employees are attracted to that sort of a leadership, right? And then the others that manage through more, being inspiring, being more motivating. Others manage it by, building the, right set of people around them. So I think it depends. And I think most important is, can you build the right level of senior management within the company so that anything that, it's not like you run the whole company, right? And I think if you have the right team members, or co-founders, some things you may be able to do right, some of it somebody else does. And I think understanding that you can leverage off somebody else is the most valuable piece. And the other thing people often ask is, you have two grown-up children. And I said, I also live in a family that is, we have 4 generations living in one household. And there are many people who enjoy doing, things that are not. So if you can delegate, whether it's within your family, whether it is in the office, I think that's a very important part of growing up and understanding how to actually build something without having to be completely stressed all the time. But you're, very go through that some of those.
You bring to mind, of course, since the theme is genetics, right? How is 4 simple bases, right? Simple organic compounds. You create this helix, and you create this helix of the company, where you have the board, which is maybe the 4 or 5, key elements, and together they sort of create through the company the whole helix, right? The whole genetic of the company. A very interesting comparison you're bringing to force to our audience, and I'm afraid we're running out of time. Should we continue with a second conversation in
the future?
Pretty soon?
Yeah, we definitely. Definitely love to have Anu back. Very, very happy to hear everything you shared today. From an entrepreneurial perspective, again, I really embrace that kind of, mentality, especially in this world of change. So thank you for lightening up with your insights, with your real world experience. Just a quick wrap up question. What's your top piece of advice for all of us, especially maybe the younger generations, who wants to make change in this coming, society by creating sustainable businesses? Please share something about it.
So I think today's younger generation is much more in tune with sustainability than our generation, honestly. And I think, we are starting to see that happen in a lot of the younger generation, whether it's my children or you and others. So I think it's easy because you're starting to see some deterioration in the environment that is already starting to happen. You're starting to see a lot of, big scams that are starting to unfold and a lot of things. So I think when you build a business, when you're building something, do it because you can make a difference. And I think, honestly, we all have a short time on earth. And, we come and we go. But if we can make a difference that makes it better for others, I think we've done our part on earth. So I think pick something that truly excites you and do something that, you've been able to make a positive change. And that's about the only thing I can tell. I think the rest of whatever you need to do, I think is also don't listen to any of the advice that I'm giving.
That's a broad disclaimer because I think we both, Isabella and I, were listening very closely to your advice. And by the way, I'm taking lots of notes. So.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anun. And I agree. But I would say, I actually say the same thing to people, Gen Z, whoever trying to learn something from me. I'll say, I'll give you something, you can take it or leave it. You don't have to take it. Yeah. And so I definitely agree. Thank you for being so open to us. Thank you for all these precious piece of advice. Thank you for taking the time to joining us. And we definitely will invite you back for another episode. This is not enough. And of course, thanks to all of our audience for tuning in every week. Make sure you're joining us for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talks series every week, where you can gain new perspectives and learn how to mitigate risks and create value by integrating ESG and digital transformation. Until next week, goodbye for now. Bye, Anun. Bye, Manuel.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye, Anu. Bye, Isabella.